within the business environment in organizations, what is your approach to creativity and innovation at work?
It's a lot of it. I've really given this a lot of thought, because that question is quite a big question.
Yes.
So when I'm working, whether it's with my own stuff or my client stuff, I think the biggest thing is to take that step back and look at what's going on as a big picture. So that's where I tend to start. So an example of that would be recently an organization that I worked with as a creative consultant had just been given a load of stuff from their top tier about what was expected of them and what they were expecting them to deliver. It was actually an innovation hub who I was working with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what was coming from the top was very, very linear, very difficult to apply creativity to. So the approach we had to take there was, okay, well, if you could rewrite this, what would it be? Mm-hmm. You know, and I think it's those questions and the what ifs and the, okay, if this isn't what, if you feel stuck with what's coming to you from whatever direction, what ideally would you like to have? And then how can you join the dots between those two? So I think that's been my approach this last year, has been look at the big picture and ask the questions that maybe push at the edges a little bit.
Yes. So pushing the edges, you know, creating some sort of disruption, I suppose, you know, because you didn't just take those linear guidelines for granted. You changed them, you adapted them, you modified them. So
yeah, and I feel like that's quite a big permission for some people to take in business. It's the permission internally or within the group to disrupt or to change it. They almost feel like they can't, or they don't have the permission either internally or externally to do it. And in fact, there's a lot of that limiting thinking going on, more than ever, I think.
And why do you think that is? You know, why do you think now, you know, people are becoming more aware of like the need, I suppose, to be challenged, to disrupt the status quo, as it were?
I think because change happens so quick now, you know, that with tech, AI, with politics, economics, like the whole outside world is ever changing, and it changes a lot quicker. And I think because we have the technology we do, we hear about those changes almost as they happen. So that responsiveness needs to exist. And yet what change does for humans, of course, is strikes in a bit of fear. So it paralyzes us, or it gets us trying to grab hold of what we know works already, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Sometimes, yes, to stick to a routine of sorts is useful, but we can become more rigid amidst this change.
And how do you, you know, like when you're working with people in organizations, how do you distinguish between the disruption, which is good, it's beneficial, and the disruption which is counterproductive and disruptive?
I think it's the sort of taking it to the nth degree, hypothetically, with either situation. Whether it's going on in my head or whether I sort of ask that, usually to out it, I think is useful. So, okay, well, if we carry on down this path, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Again, the questions and the use of kind of forward thinking and imagination. How might that look? What might that mean? Can often tell the difference between a disruption that's going to be useful and disruption that's going to be not useful or destructive in a non-creative way.
Okay. And in your experience managing highly creative people, have you faced challenges in being able to manage the disruptors?
Have I faced challenges? I don't know if I've faced challenges with them. There's definitely been conversations. And this is something that's become very apparent to me this year, actually, which is the time that we bring in the disruptor or the disruption is really key. So if we bring it in too early, we can almost destroy creativity entirely or completely frighten people into, oh, I don't want to go near that. Whereas actually if someone has more of those disruptive tendencies or plays that disruptive role, to absolutely welcome them in and say, yeah, we want that, bring that in, but being very specific about when and under what circumstances they're utilised or their strengths are utilised. I think that's key. And I've sort of come up with the 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through seems to be the optimum time to bring people in. That's obviously if you know the end of a project, but sometimes we don't know and we have to sort of, you know, trust our instincts on it a bit.
Right. Yeah, the timing has to be right, doesn't it? But you know, some people would argue, well, it's better to have the disruption at the beginning because then you know, like nothing has been molded. Whereas like later on down the line, people may feel, well, a lot of their work will be wasted if it's disrupted.
I guess that's why the parameters around what is disruption are really important, aren't they? It's to let someone have free reign over it. Probably is better earlier on. But if you are disrupting it with a particular means or focusing on a specific area, then I think later down the line can be useful. It can also drive people's will to push something through to the end if you bring it in sort of 2/3 of the way through because they're already invested. Whereas actually, I feel like if disruption happens too early, people kind of can throw the towel in and go, okay, well, I don't want to be involved with this. It feels too big.
Yes.
I think it's a case-by-case one, you know. Sometimes we have to really feel our way and watch what the behaviours are in response to what's happening. And everyone has their different tendencies around change and creativity. So it's being responsive to that.
And when you're working with teams, I suppose it depends on the stage at which the team is in terms of their development. Because if they are, you know, if they've already gelled and they work really well together, it's a very cohesive team. And then you bring in a disruptor, and that can be counterproductive because the existing team will find it, well, you know, this is the way we've done things, and they might feel demoralized if an outsider comes in and challenges everything that they've, you know, maybe spent a whole year working on.
Yeah. Which is why I think it's good to have an overt conversation about creativity and the process of it in terms of, you know, and then having a reference point or several reference points around disruption and what it can do, rather than just feeling like someone's coming along and sabotaging what they've put their hard work into, which can be demoralizing and definitely demotivating. It's about trust, I think, you know, trust both within the team and trust when someone new comes in. And it's making sure that that's there to some extent is really important. If there's no trust or there's an unknown, then people are likely to grab hold of what they've developed and keep it close, which isn't awesome.
And that's essential. The trust is absolutely essential, and trust and creativity seem to be very deeply associated. So in the work environment, how do you create trust then? How do you create an atmosphere or an environment of trust?
Yeah, open conversation is massive for me. I always encourage that open conversation, and there's no wrong, there's only different approaches, and then it's about what's appropriate for any given context. I also encourage people and teams in particular to talk about things that are genuine worries or genuine concerns, so that they get it out early on, so that doesn't get in the way later. I'm just going to open the door because my dog's just scratching. I'm so sorry. Come on then. I was hoping she was going to sleep through this.
But creativity is very much associated with change, with continuous improvement, and, you know, a culture of, as you say, being open and perhaps transparent. And, you know, what do you think are the obstacles that prevent continuous improvement, for example? Because everyone would say, well, yes, of course, we want to be continuously improving, but it doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't always happen. Hierarchy can be a negative sometimes. I mean, often I would go as far as to say, when it comes to those changes, unless you've got the people sort of at the top level, or you're working in a non-hierarchical company or organization, then obviously it's different. But you've got to have that buy-in at the top for people to feel like it's gonna work. Otherwise, people tend to not want to go there. They're fearful, or they're cynical about it, or they just feel like, oh, it's a waste of time. Also, time can be, you know, or perceived lack of time can be a conversation that I often have. Oh, we don't have time for this. And it's that thing of, well, if we invest the time and think about the time as giving ourselves brain space on this rather than a linear concept, then we might save a lot of time and energy later down the line. So again, it's that big picture concept. So lack of time or perceived lack of time. And it's the old one, which is lack of resources or lack of financial you know, availability, again, can stop people from trying something on because they think or assume it's going to be costly to them in one way, shape or form. And so that can block unless you've got a few champions. I always find if you've got one or two champions who understand creativity and how resourceful you can be with it, that can tip a team into giving it a go. But if you've got a cynical team on the whole, or a team that isn't familiar, then it can be hard. It can be like pushing uphill.
Yes. And also, like in a hierarchical structure, those at the top can be a bit patronizing about ideas that come from their subordinates. They might be very open to ideas that come from above them, their superiors, but not their subordinates.
I think that's true. I think that's very true. And it's always lovely when you see an organisation who does listen regardless. And I still think it's quite a rare creature. And again, it is that hierarchical. It's kind of like an old way of thinking, isn't it? That if you're at the top, like, of course you will have experience and expertise and stuff under your belt. And sometimes a different lens is useful. And sometimes the lens of inexperience can be incredibly useful, or the lens of just a different perspective or a different age group. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be talked about more, is how useful and what assets everybody can be, regardless of age, experience, how long they've been in that sector.
Yes, it's about looking at things from different points of view, from various stakeholders' points of view. Very often in an organisation, it's limited, isn't it? The number of stakeholders that they take into consideration. It might be just the customers, but the customers are not the only stakeholders.
Exactly. And that ability to, I know we used the word agile at the beginning of the conversation, but that ability for everyone to become more agile in terms of shifting their perspective and saying, okay, well, this is my perspective, but let me just park that and let me just move over here and see how it looks from here, or how it might look from here, is so valuable. And yet it's something that is underused, that idea.
I was reading something yesterday where it was about, they were looking at stakeholders, and as part of the stakeholder analysis, they were looking at things from the point of view of the environment, the point of view of animals, you know. And I thought, yes, that was heartening, because
that's really nice, isn't it? Yeah. And it doesn't have to just be the humans, it can be all sorts of perspectives.
Yes. Yeah.
I think when we look to things like film, particular film and TV, we look at the camera, you know, where the camera is shooting from the perspective of. And for a little while now, where there's been a few things where they've been shooting from the perspective of the inanimate object, which is kind of that, isn't it? And I always find that's quite interesting.
Well, you talk about film. I mean, when we see animations and it's from the point of view of the horse or the rabbit, you know, walking around, you know, it's like, I mean, that is creativity as well, isn't it? Being able to see things from, you know, like a spider's point of view or the bee's point of view.
Yeah, and it's absolutely lovely as well, because it really makes us see things and create an awareness that maybe we didn't have before. We maybe had a little blind spot there, or maybe we just never considered it before. And sometimes I think solutions can be in that, can't they?
Yes.
You're like, oh, we have an aha moment from that.
Yeah, some of those ideas probably came from children, you know, the idea of like looking at things from the point of, you know, Black Beauty, for example, that idea was a child's idea of like looking at things from her horse's point of view, and as it's like, it's that fresh thinking that we need to take into consideration ideas. An idea could be extremely valuable, and it might come from someone who's not even a part of our organization.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of value, I think, in that objective perspective, someone who knows very little of the culture or the politics internally of somewhere, who can just see through in a really clean way.
Yeah, because there's two schools of thought about creativity. Some people say, oh, you have to be an expert first in order to be creative, you know, because first of all, you need to know the rules and you need to kind of follow the systems, obeying the rules, and then be able to break them. And then there's the other school of thought. It's like, well, as you just alluded to earlier, that someone with totally a lack of experience, like an engineer, going into a business environment, may be able to see things that a business person doesn't see.
Exactly. I think they're both valuable. I think again, it's case specific, and sometimes looking at both can be useful. It doesn't have to exclusively be one or the other.
Yes. there's a time and place for, you know, it's like, we don't know if the engineer is going to have any valuable ideas, but sometimes they might.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is it. And I know it's a famous Disney piece of work that was done, where they would use like people from the CEOs to the cleaners in their huge brainstorms, and everyone's point of view counted. And also that was lovely because they would have a completely different perspective from what someone at a senior management level would have. And I always remember reading that and thinking, wow, loads of, you know, we should make that a thing, that everyone should adopt that.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know very much about that example, but you know, I hope that they would have taken off their hats of who they were. You know, like take off their role of
the role,
CEO and whatever, that they were working on an even platform.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think that's the optimum ground, isn't it? That's your fertile ground for creativity, is when everyone is, we're all just human beings with a perspective here. Let's put the roles aside. Let's put everything else aside. What is our perspective here? And that's where it can really thrive.
Yeah. So Dannie-Lu, what else is important for you in terms of creativity and innovation in organizations?
I would say to challenge what I've started to call a buried narrative, which is, I guess, it's another way of talking about the culture of an organization, and starting to be aware of what influence that has, both positive, negative, neutral, in terms of an organization, and being able to look at that and question that. What is that, and how can we start to move that on, or keep it conscious, so that we don't get entrenched in something that's not conducive to change, agility, creative thinking. That's very important. The other thing is the environment. It has become increasingly important to me when I see how people work. There's a lot of open space working now, for example, which can be fantastic for people having the conversations. But in actual fact, what it often means is people's space is encroached on, or they don't have as much control or autonomy over their space, and how much that's important for us as individuals to work more effectively and be more creative. So, you know, some people will like a clear desk and lots of daylight and quiet, for example, and other people might like a little bit of chaos and background noise, and, you know, and sometimes it might be some sort of combination of those. So making people aware of how much that plays in, like, hinders or helps, and helping them to have the permissions and have the conversations which allow that space to happen. And also when they allow people to hijack their time. Because again, when people feel like their time and space and energy is hijacked, their creativity plummets and their resourcefulness plummets. So those conversations have been quite big for me this year with a lot of my clients. And also, you know, for my own work, kind of thinking, am I working effectively at this desk? Should I go work, you know, at the library? Should I go work at a club? Should I go and work in a park? You know, like what do I need that day? And if I'm not working, you know, if I'm getting those brain blocks, or I can't really think very well, being able to go, okay, what's going on environmentally here that might be getting in the way? I think it's bigger than I've previously personally given it the weighting of.
Right. So that flexibility in terms of, you know, like some people are very creative at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes. So the 9 to 5 is not going to, you know, they're not that.
No, it often isn't. I mean, I often find first thing in the morning, often when I'm not even awake properly, is when my ideas pop in, you know, like 5 a.m. or something like that. And if I have got the luxury of creating stuff, then I will get up and create it then. And I think that flexible working is key. I agree. The 9 to 5 gets people very stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like being forced. It's like being put in a box. It's like, you know, you must be creative now. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly. You can't. It's like being able to, like, perform it on demand, isn't it?
Yes.
Some people I think are blessed that they can do it because it fits their body clock. But I've met more people, I think, that struggle within those windows than thrive in those windows.
I mean, some people get their best ideas when they're playing golf, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been reading recently a book called Rest, which is really fantastic and brings back the ancient thinking of the Stoics in terms of we need to rest before we can work, before we can apply ourselves, and how we've got that flipped around the wrong way in modern society, and it's been that way for some time. You know, we have to work hard to earn the rest, and how actually rest can be It's not necessarily being asleep, it's playing golf, it's going for a run, it's playing a game, it's doing something that's just different and puts our brain in a different space. And how then if we do that, we prime ourselves to be creative and work more effectively. And I love that idea.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, because creativity needs incubation, and people forget that incubation entails a great deal of rest.
Yes, absolutely. We feel guilty about it. There's all sorts of human emotions of guilt and judgment and stuff that is, and it's often self perpetuated. Mm-hmm. As well. You know, the more you drill into that, the more I've drilled into that with people, it's that whole thing of like, oh no, but someone will, you know, they'll think I'm being lazy.
Absolutely, that's true.
And it's like, have they said that? No. Have they indicated that? No, but I'm scared they will. And it's how much can we push at the edges more than we believe we can?
Yeah, but very often people do say that. You know, they say, you know, my workforce are lazy. They're lazy. Yeah. And these are designers, and they are expected to be productive, not kind of be resting, not thinking, not reflecting.
Yeah, it's how we define creative work, isn't it? I think, and what those expectations are. You know, it's not always about being applied, it's about allowing the incubation time. I often think when I'm walking my dog, I have the best ideas as well, and I really think about how can I solve that problem or whatever. And of course, that doesn't look like work at all from an outside eye, or what we traditionally view as work.
Yes. And I suppose it's the story that we're creating as well, isn't it? It's our, you know, you mentioned earlier the narrative.
Yeah.
The personal narrative. What's the story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves in the workplace, and what is the story of the organization that we're in? How do we fit into that bigger story?
Yeah, and how do we make that story play out differently as well? We don't have to just adhere to the story that we think is there. But I think once we can out that narrative and get people starting to realize what it is, because often we're not even conscious of it as well, we just fall into those lines, then you really can create an environment which will help creativity flourish and will help people be more aware of what's possible.
Right, yeah, excellent. So any final points, Dannie-Lu?
There was a point about technology that you made when you sent me some stuff, and I've got me really thinking about technology, because I don't work hugely directly with tech, but I have a few clients who are tech business, my partner's in the tech business. And then it made me think about a client that I worked with last year who used virtual reality to problem solve. And I'm still very curious about what that does. I tried it for 10 minutes. You know, I was quite tentative about it. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to go into this. And I went in, and it was all about moving stuff around that represented different problems. So it was working with that perspective, but also the space is different in virtual reality than it is in sort of normal day-to-day existence, if you like. And what was really striking for me was when I came out of that VR and I took off the headset and the everything else, it took me a while to recalibrate back into normal, whatever that means. And then it just made me realize how little of our creative brain we haven't really explored yet. There's so much more there.
Yes, that is very interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating area, and I suppose we even if we are not interested in it, we need to be interested in it, because that's the trends are, that's the way we're moving, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. And Noah Yuval Harari's work, I think he really gets it in terms of, you know, we need the creativity to keep developing the human so that it can keep pace with, influence and collaborate with the AI and technology of the future, which is still to come. And that's why I think more than ever that nurturing of our creative selves is crucial.
Absolutely, yeah. There's just so much wondrous stuff that is awaiting us.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting.
It is, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, Dannie-Lu, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Likewise, it's always lovely to touch base with you and chat.
Okay, great. I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.